What's going on, Jam Fam? Welcome back to the gaming station. So, I'm probably going to be a little bit late on this because I woke up late and now I'm trying to get this all recorded and everything, but they did just announce the April balance changes, so I just wanted to talk about them. There's a good handful of both buffs and nerfs in this round of changes, so this might end up being a bit longer of a video if I tend to ramble or not. But overall, I think a lot of these changes are pretty good. A couple of them address some power creep issues that are in the game right now, and I think there's a few changes that are going to be pretty inconsequential. So we'll talk about all that as we go through the list. But real quick, comment down below what you think are the best changes, which ones are your favorite, and which ones you don't like as well. And as always, feel free to comment on any of my thoughts on the changes. As always, I'm more than willing to discuss my thoughts, and I always like to hear your guys' feedback as well. So yeah, comment down below any of that stuff. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's get into the actual balance changes. And we're going to start with the nerfs, because I think those are pretty impactful overall. And the first nerf I want to talk about is Byron. Now, Byron's attack damage is getting nerfed by 10.5%. Now, if I'm not mistaken, they did just nerf his damage in the last round of balance changes, so now they're hitting it again, and I think they're overdoing it a little bit. I think that there's other issues with Byron's kit that should be addressed over his damage. I know when he was first released, his range was a big point of contention. I think that could be brought back just by a hair. And as my Discord buddy / club vice president Sorty pointed out, his super could use a nerf as well. I feel like that's another big point of his kit, being able to heal and do 2,000 something damage right off the bat. I think that's a big power boost for him, and I think if they brought that back in line a little bit, I think that would be a lot better for his kit. So yeah, overall, I think they're just overdoing his damage nerfs, and they're not really addressing anything else that makes him strong, like example, his range and super. The next change I want to talk about is Ruffs. Ruffs is getting a 6.7% HP nerf, and his unload speed is going to get nerfed, so it's going to take him longer to shoot off all 3 shots. I think both of these are really good changes. His HP nerf will bring him in line with a lot of other sharpshooters in the game. And then his unload speed was pretty obnoxious. It gave him very solid burst damage. For a brawler like Ruffs, I don't think you really want him to have a lot of burst damage like he did. And when I say burst damage, I mean like shooting off all 3 shots and being able to get close to 4,500 HP off of a brawler, which can 3-shot a lot of brawlers right off the bat. So overall, I think this is going to make Ruffs a lot less spammy. He's going to have to play a lot more patient because of the HP nerf, and he's not going to be able to get in people's faces and just unload 3 shots super quick without taking too much damage. However, I do think Ruffs is still going to offer a ton of support to his team, and that's just going to make him super solid. Being able to buff all your teammates in both the damage aspect and HP aspect makes him a really solid brawler to just try to get super and then buff up your teammates. So if he doesn't fall out of the meta, I won't be surprised just because of the way his kit works. Alright, moving on. The next brawler I want to talk about getting a nerf is Mr. P. Mr. P's attack damage is getting nerfed by 5.3%, and his porters that spawn from his gadget are getting nerfed as well. They're going to have 50% of the HP nerfed and 23% of their damage nerfed. So honestly, I don't think I really care too much about the damage nerf. I don't think Mr. P's kit was strong because of the damage that he could do, because he only did like 1,000 damage if you landed one of the shots, 2,000 if you landed both. What really forced Mr. P into the meta was that gadget. Being able to have multiple porters on the map at once made it really difficult for enemy teams to deal with. Especially if you're running revolving door and having your spawner constantly pumping out porters, and then you just throw another one like behind a brawler so that they have damage coming from both sides. So the porters that get spawned from the gadget might have been over-nerfed just a little bit, because now they're going to die as soon as they get sneezed on. They basically have like no HP now. But honestly, it was such an obnoxious combination to deal with that I'm okay with it being over-nerfed. And if Mr. P falls out of the meta, so be it. It's not that big a deal. He's been pretty strong for a while, so I think we're all okay with a meta that doesn't have Mr. P in it for a little bit. Okay, moving on. The next brawler I want to talk about is Amber. Her reload speed's getting nerfed by 10%. So I actually really like this change because they did just nerf her damage in the last round of balance changes. So this does address her being like super strong and being like one of the premier tank counters in the game. And while this does reduce her total DPS when you consider like reloading speed and everything, her total overall damage per ammo bar is staying the same, which I think was in a healthy spot. It's just that she reloaded a little too quickly. And I think that reducing her total damage would have actually hurt her a lot more, to the point where they might be overdoing it just a little bit. So yeah, I'm a fan of this change. I think she's still going to be viable, but she's not going to be quite as strong. And with another buff that's later on this list, I think that there's going to be other tank options other than just Amber. All right, on to probably my least favorite change in this round of balance changes, and that's going to be the Sprout nerfs. So Sprout's getting his attack damage reduced by 3.9%, and his gadget healing is going to be reduced from 2,000 to 1,500. And I don't dislike these changes because I don't think Sprout needed a nerf, because Sprout is way too strong and he definitely did need a nerf. My problem with it is they're not really addressing the things that make Sprout actually really strong, and that's the fact that he's such a safe brawler to play, that he has such long range, such high HP, access to a shield, and access to a quick burst heal, that it's almost impossible to die when you're playing Sprout the right way. Why are they not addressing his HP or his shield? They did address photosynthesis, but I don't think it's enough to actually deal with Sprout in the meta by itself. He's still going to be able to hang out behind a wall, either one that's on the map or one that he made, and be able to just deal chip damage nonstop. And even reducing chip damage isn't really that great because it still allows your teammates to secure kills for you. And then as soon as you get in trouble, you just back up, find some grass to get your shield up, eat the grass to heal yourself back up, and you're right back into the fight. So yeah, in my opinion, Sprout's still going to be really strong. They're not really addressing the big issues, like I said. Alright, moving on, we got Stu. Stu is getting his HP nerfed by 6.3% and his attack damage nerfed by 3.3%. So while I do think that these nerfs are very justified and that they're pretty decent, I think that Stu's still going to be very strong, and I think he's going to be a really hard brawler to balance, in my opinion. That's because a lot of his strength lies in the fact that he has a ton of mobility and he has knockback that he can just constantly spam on brawlers when he gets close to them. And that's, of course, set up because his super charges in one shot. So I think what should have happened is they should have changed it so that you need to hit both projectiles to charge up his super, not just one. So while I don't think the damage nerf is really going to affect anything, it might change a few interactions here and there. I think the HP nerf is a step in the right direction because that prevents him from being super aggro like all the time. But because he's still going to be able to spam supers and constantly knock opponents back out of their attacks and everything, I think he's still going to be very viable to play. Alright, we're on to our second to last nerf, and that's going to be Tick. Now, Tick's getting a 5.9% damage reduction, and I think that this is a really good change, because I think Tick did way too much damage if you hit more than one mine, because you were hitting like almost 1,000 damage per mine. So it was very punishing, especially if you got caught in a corner or something like that. However, I think I would still like to see a nerf to how long the mines actually sit on the map, because it offers Tick way too much control, and it can be extremely annoying to play around, especially if you're on a map that has a lot of choke points, something like in a hot zone map or something like that. But yeah, I'm okay with the damage nerf. I think it is something that did need to be addressed on Tick, so overall, I'm okay with it. I think he's still going to be viable, but this is a step in the right direction. At least they see that he's strong. Alright, if the Sprout changes aren't my least favorite one in this balance changes, this is probably going to be my least favorite. BB's shield star power is getting nerfed by 10%, and as a BB main, I do have a hard time being unbiased about this change, especially considering this is my preferred star power to run on her. However, after her HP buff, this did become the better star power on her because it got her closer to 6,000 HP, and the speed star power fell off very hard. So, if I'm honest, I prefer the shield to get nerfed over her base HP because at least BB stays more viable this way. Because we saw how hard she fell out of the meta once they reduced her total HP, and I would not want to see that again personally. So this balances out the star powers amongst themselves, keeping both of them viable at the same time, depending on which one you prefer to run or have. And it still keeps BB in a healthy spot because it doesn't change her overall HP, which, like I said, we saw her fall hard out of the meta once they reduced that. So when I look at it like that, I'm happy that this change happened instead of just a total HP nerf. Alright, so that wraps up the nerfs. Now we're going to talk about the buffs. And the first one we're going to talk about is Barley. Barley is getting his range increased by 9% and his damage increased by 2.9%. So I honestly think Barley is going to be one of those sleeper brawlers that's going to be really strong in the meta, but everybody doesn't use because he's going to be outshined by both Tick and Sprout still. But I think he's going to be more than viable in modes like Heist and Siege, where he can do a ton of damage and it still offers a ton of control all at the same time. And don't forget that they did just buff his damage star power in the last round of balance changes, and now he's getting more range and more damage on top of all that. So I think Barley's going to be in a super healthy spot, and no one's going to play him, honestly. Okay, moving on to Carl. Carl's getting a 10% range buff, and this is walking back one of his previous range nerfs after Flying Hook was released, if I'm not mistaken. I think overall this is going to be a decent change for him. It's going to make him a lot stronger, and it's going to help him get his super, which is where a lot of his strength lies in his kit. I don't think he's going to be meta or anything, but he's going to be easier to play. He's going to get his supers a little bit easier, and like I said already, that's where his strength lies. So overall, I think it's a good change for him. Okay, the next buff I want to talk about is Spike. Now, Spike's getting a 5% reload speed buff. Honestly, I don't think most players are really going to notice this buff. it could be deadly, as my buddy Sorty pointed out, but we'll have to wait and see to actually see how it performs in-game. But overall, I think it's going to be a pretty inconsequential buff, and nobody's really going to notice it, and I don't think it's going to help him get back into the meta or anything like that. Alright, moving on, we're going to go to Lou. Lou's buffs are going to be that his freeze is increasing by half a second, and his damage is going to increase by 10%. I think these are okay changes. Lou's only really strong in Siege. This is going to make him a lot better in Siege. He might be one of the premier defenders when it comes to that game mode now. However, I don't think this is going to help him outside of Siege. I think he's just a clunky brawler to play. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but yeah, in my opinion, he's clunky, and he has a hard time finding spots in other modes where you would rather just play other brawlers. So they're decent changes, but I don't know how far they're actually going to go for him outside of Siege. Alright, the next buff is that Poco's super is going to charge with 1 less hit. It's going from 5 attacks to 4 attacks. And this is actually a change me and Sorty disagree about. Sorty says that it's going to be broken considering how strong Poco double tank already is. However, my opinion is that this is actually a good change because this addresses the power creep that Byron's had on Poco. Byron having more range and more often than not out healing Poco has pushed Poco very far out of the meta. The only reason why we see him is because Byron gets banned all the time, especially in competitive play. So having Poco a little more viable in that regard kind of evens out their power strength a little bit. However, I do think that Byron's still going to be the preferred healer when it comes to a comp, especially like in Bounty or something like that. So I don't think we're going to see Poco being picked over Byron when Byron's not banned. Alright, moving on. Frank is getting his damage buffed by 3.3% to both his super and his normal attack. I don't know how many interactions this is actually going to change for Frank. I think overall it's a decent change. It might be a little inconsequential overall. The only thing I really have to say is at least it's not another HP buff because I think Frank has way too much HP as it is. So a damage buff to try to get him into the meta is okay in my opinion. Okay, we're going to move on to Surge. Now Surge is getting a 5.4% damage buff, and I do kind of feel like he needed this change. Not that Surge was exactly a bad brawler, but he kind of is outshined by other brawlers that kind of fill the same role as him. The only thing is I worry about Surge being OP with his teleport power like he was back in the summer. Because if he teleports onto you and he does 3 shots plus a super, that's a ton of damage. He might only need 2 shots in a super to deal with most brawlers. And that's a situation that really has no play around. He's just going to teleport on you and then you're done, especially if he has his shots loaded and a super ready to go. That's my one concern about this change. I don't know if this is actually going to make him one of the premier mid-range fighters in the game. We'll have to wait and see on that. Alright, we got 2 more balance changes to get through. These ones are kind of small, so I might just blow through them real quick. Emz's Bad Karma star power is getting buffed by 5%. I think this is a really small change, and I don't know how big of an impact it's actually going to have on her overall. However, just like with Poco and Byron, this does address the power creep that Amber had on Ems. However, because Amber outranges Ems and does more damage overall, even if Ems is running the star power, I think that Amber is still going to be the preferred tank counter in most scenarios. And honestly, I'm not sure what you change about Ems to get her more towards Amber's level. We'll have to wait and see what they figure out, but I don't think this is really going to push Amber out of the meta for Ems. And just like that, we're moving on to our final balance change, and that's going to be that Jackie's Counter Crush is getting its range buffed. Now, I haven't actually seen how wide of a range this is. I haven't watched any of the sneak peek videos about this yet. However, I think that even if it has a sizable range buff, I think that Hardy Hard Hat is still going to be preferred just because that affects you the entire time you're on the board, not just when you're in range of people. And that's because when you're playing Counter Crush, if you're not in range of people, you effectively have no star power because you're not getting that damage reflection on the attacks that you're taking. As to where if you're playing Hardy Hard Hat, that damage reduction is always going to be in effect, so you effectively have more HP than you would if you were running Counter Crush. So while conceptually I really like the idea of Counter Crush, when it actually plays in game depending on the map and mode you're playing, I find it to be pretty ineffective, and I don't know if it's ever going to be like more viable than Hardy Hard Hat just because of the way the mechanics work for it. So yeah, that's all the balance changes. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this was going to be a little bit longer, and now we're right around the 15-minute mark. So yeah, thanks for watching all the way through if you made it this far. Like I said at the beginning of the video, comment down below what your favorite changes are and what you thought of my opinions. Personally, I really like the Barley buffs. I think he's going to be a sleeper brawler, and he's going to be very good, especially in Siege or Heist, where he can just focus on the Ike or Safe and just do a ton of damage. And my least favorite was probably the Sprout nerf, but I'm not a big fan of the BB nerf either just because I'm a BB main. But objectively, the Sprout nerf is worse because they're just not addressing the issue with Sprout. But I'm going to end my rambling for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.